So I would definitely want to understand that how is your business doing? And this entire pandemic conversation has really seemed to be the inflection point for the adoption of Edtech globally. So how are you looking at those trends? Give us some color there.
Yeah, as you can imagine, we could have never imagined a situation like this when we were been building Khan Academy for the last 10 years or so. But as we started to realize that we might see school closings, and we started seeing our traffic pick up in Asia, because obviously they saw their closings first in East Asia. But then when it started to become clear that it would be in the United States and India and much of the rest of the world, we realized, it's one of those moments where you look to the left, you look to the right, and you say, maybe this is us. We've got to step up here. Because obviously whatever people need to keep learning during physical school closures, it has to be accessible, it has to be high quality, trusted, it has to cover multiple subjects and grades, and frankly, that's what Khan Academy is all about. And so we started stress testing our server capacity. We started organizing webinars for teachers and parents. We started putting out daily schedules. We started thinking about what other functionalities and content can we accelerate forward. And then as soon as the closure started to happen around the world, we saw our traffic be about 3x, 300% of what it typically is. And so we've been trying to keep up with that. And at the same time, make sure that we can support folks through the end of the school year, through the summer. And this coming back to school is very uncertain in a lot of ways, but we think we can help with schools and teachers and parents and students navigate that and help close gaps in preparation for that.
Okay. So I'll tell you one thing that, during the entire pandemic conversation, there's this one term which has been sort of very loosely bandied around, the new normal, right, or the next normal. But does one really want to get back to the normal is the question, because the normal sort of showed us that it was weak and vulnerable. The entire conversation is sort of now shifting to being anti-fragile, right, as we sort of look ahead. So how can you become anti-fragile in the edtech space, so to speak?
Yeah, I guess there's two levels of anti-fragility. One is the anti-fragility as an organization, and then the anti-fragility as a system as a whole. If we think about the system, every school leader I'm talking to around the world, they realize that they need to keep students learning not just through the end of the year, they need to keep students learning through the summer. So that's a silver lining of this whole crisis, is that in the past, the summer was a time when kids didn't learn or oftentimes forgot. The middle income, upper middle income, affluent families could afford tutors and whatever else, but a lot of low income students their skills would atrophy. And then we know as we go into this back to school, Khan Academy has been working on the issue of always, even pre-COVID, students would show up to school with different level of preparedness. And every teacher knows this. There's 30 kids in the room, sometimes 40 or more kids in the room. They all have different needs, different gaps, all ready to learn at different paces. What do you do? And so we've always been creating software and tools so that a teacher can let everyone learn at their own pace and then fill in the gaps as necessary. All of it, of course, is all free and non-commercial. And that's going to be that much more important for this coming back to school. And, the new normal that you're referring to is, it's not going to be, school kids just go there. People are talking about social distancing, having to do some shift-based model. Even when there are some kids in the school, there are going to be some kids out of school. Either their shift is off, or some families are just not going to feel comfortable sending their kids. They might have an elderly relative in the house, or someone's immunocompromised. And so this new normal that you're talking about, I think, will be more anti-fragile, which is, no matter what is going on, the learning will not be completely bound by time and space. We all believe that the in-person experience is very valuable. There's nothing like that in-person interactive experience when you're in the same space with folks. But at the same time, you want to get the best of that while also letting students learn at their own time and pace, letting them learn from wherever they are, whether they're at school, inside the house, on a bus. That learning should just never stop. And I think everyone recognizes that you have these different models that might emerge this coming back to school, and then we might have to close again if the virus picks up. And so all of that is leading to this world of getting the best of both worlds and being able to move very quickly and very nimbly from one to the other. From an organizational, if you're saying kind of anti-fragility from a Khan Academy point of view, that's something I'm thinking a lot about. We're philanthropically supported. All of the work we're able to do is because of amazing philanthropists. Our work in India is funded by Tata Trusts and others. Our work in the globally is mainly philanthropically supported. So you could imagine, if I've told our team, we just have to do what's right. Our expenses have gone up, even if we're going into our reserves. This is a moment where the world expects us to step up, but it is a little bit of a risk because we are likely going into a recession or already into one. And so I'm hoping that the world recognizes that, the social return of something like Khan Academy is a high one.
So that you mentioned that your expenses have gone up. You are sort of take feeding into your reserves. But tell me one thing, like in India, for instance, or globally, and you also mentioned the word that we're getting into a recession. It seems a very bizarre kind of situation that we are into right now, where both the engines of the economy, the consumption and the supply side, is not firing up, right? You might be seeing a huge uptick in where people are signing up and students are signing up more and more to consume content online. But how do you monetize that? Of course, you are free, but there are so many edtech players in India which have received huge amounts of funding. So while there's huge content sign up or consumption happening, but are people really paying for it during this time? How do you solve for those problems?
Yeah, well, I set up Khan Academy as a not-for-profit for a reason. In the early days of Khan, my original background, I used to be an investor at a hedge fund. So I come from a very for-profit world. And for the most part, I believe in capitalism. I believe in market forces. But I think there's certain parts of our society where market forces either don't function well, or maybe if they do function well, they lead to outcomes that are not consistent with our values. And education and probably healthcare are the two areas where, if you think about, normally you have a buyer and a seller, and the buyer is the beneficiary and also the decision maker. And so they can kind of decide what's right. But in the education realm, usually the buyer is a different person than the beneficiary is a different person than the person paying for it. And that leads to some strangeness in the market. And then even where you do have, let's say, a for-profit market-driven industry, that outcome is that only certain kids have access to certain things, and then other kids won't have access, and there's too many frictions to learning. And so our bet at Khan Academy is, let's make it not for profit. Let's give it free, no commerciality, based on the principle that there should be no frictions. But it was an aspirational bet, because we said we also want to be world class. We want to be the thing that even if they have options, even if they have resources, they would still want to use Khan Academy because it has the most efficacy, it's the most engaging. And so, we are seeing, we are happy that we're seeing the surge in usage, because that's impact. Those are people we serve. We hope it goes 10x of where it is. But we just have to keep making the case to philanthropy, to corporate partners, to sponsors, that this is eventually maybe even governments, that this is work that needs to be done, and it has to be done in a very, very equal way. In theory, some of this work, it could be the place of governments, but I think even the governments themselves realize that this type of fast cycle innovation and content creation, it isn't typically in a government's wheelhouse, and so that's where the NGO or the not-for-profit sector is valuable. On the for-profit side, I think a lot of folks are doing the right thing. They're making their content free for now, so that people can access it. But that's obviously not a sustainable model either. And so I think as we go further and further through this crisis, I hope a lot of folks realize, especially in India, I've heard skepticism about that. Well, there must be a catch if it's free. I'd rather pay for something just thinking it's, I guarantee anyone, look at the research studies, go talk to people who have resources, and look, compare the thing that you could be paying money for versus the free Khan Academy. And I think you'd be surprised that the free one is actually the higher quality one right now.
Yeah, but like the point that you mentioned, that how long can this be sustainable? Also, the point of the matter is that a lot of these edtech startups have raised huge rounds of funding. I mean, some of them take a lot of vanity and pride in labeling themselves as unicorns also, right? And that comes at a cost, right? I mean, you have a huge burn rate to sort of service, you have VCs to answer, you have to answer your stakeholders. So do you think the pandemic can really put to test this entire model of, paying for edtech? I mean, to sort of really put that into question, do you think?
I don't think it's going to put it to question. I'm sure many of these companies are going to do very well. I'm sure there's a lot of people looking to pay for online learning of some kind. So I don't doubt that they'll do fine. And I think many of them, have an interesting niche in a certain part that could add a lot of value. But what I hope is that folks realize that you shouldn't have to pay for this type of thing, that there is very high quality resources that are free, that are being used by, by everyone, and that are the highest quality. So, I find it to be a little bit of a tragedy, especially in places like India, where you know, education is so important, and a family, you know, a middle income family is spending a third of their income paying for something that actually still might be, you know, lower quality or not as good quality as things that they might have for free, just because there's a perception that if I pay, I'm actually getting something of higher value. So, you know, I would just, as much as possible, encourage people to challenge those assumptions.
Okay. In terms of monetization models, of course, you are free, but if you were to give advice to some of the edtech startups who are there, what could that really be? You think it's subscription model, or where do we go from here?
Well, it depends what you're doing. You know, I think all models are, you know, if your goal is monetization, your goal is to, um, I think subscription models could make sense. I think, you know, people talk about, you know, freemium models, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really what your goal is. You know, I think there are some companies that have gotten good niches in certain parts of it, but you know, the more interesting one is, can you come up with revenue models that are consistent with making it as accessible as possible, and maybe getting revenue in other ways. You know, some of where we've gotten earned revenue is, for example, in the United States, the SAT, you know, the main college entrance exam in the United States, the College Board, which is another not-for-profit, they pay us, they pay Khan Academy, give us revenue in order for us to create the free SAT official practice, which is free to students. So I love that type of a revenue model, because the College Board, the people who administer the SAT, they want it because more people will be prepared for their test. There's more value in the entire offering. And we love it because we're getting revenue, sustainable revenue, that allows us to do something of service and hopefully level the playing field for a lot of students. So, you know, those types of revenue models that I like the most.
Okay, Sal, I would also want to understand more from you that, of course, you are a global franchise. You work in the US and in India. What have been the key learnings, of your functionings and operations in India? And what do you think that you can take from the US and bring to India?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we're still learning. You know, India, and you know, it's India. I would say the entire Indian subcontinent, and some of what I'm saying is even true of Asia generally. You know, I've appreciated that in the West, there is a more of a, I would say, a view that even if something is not exactly what is going to be on the test at school, that it's going to be good for you, and so you should work on it. And then that is in general true. If you master algebra on Khan Academy, your classroom test might not look the same, and but you will do just fine, and vice versa. And I think in the West, there's more of an openness to this, that you don't necessarily teach as much to the test. While in India, there's definitely an emphasis of, I want exactly what's on the test. And even if, you know, hopefully a trustworthy person like myself says, no, trust me, even though this is a little bit different, if you do well on this, you're going to do just fine on the test. I think people want to see that more direct mapping. So in India, we are investing more in, you know, really getting super aligned, not to just to the global standards, but to exactly the Indian standards. You know, I found it entertaining that, you know, the English, we have a whole effort of Khan Academy in English, and it's entertaining. You know, I was like, well, isn't a South Asian guy speaking English good enough for you? So we have the whole English effort, and you know, so it's just interesting how to navigate that. Obviously, the way in India that folks interface with devices is different. Things like text messages, you know, so it's definitely pushed us to think about, how do we integrate in those types of modalities, which aren't as popular in places like the United States. But you know, but a lot of stuff is also true. You know, there's a lot of kids who want to learn, a lot of families who are hungry for learning, and there's, you know, with online modalities, there is a lot of learning that can happen, and still a very small percentage of people are fully aware of it.
Sal, I would also want to understand from you that, a lot of Indians used to go to Ivy League institutes, for instance. That was really the norm for a lot of middle class family, that you save up and send your kid abroad. And now with the kind of changing sort of forces, maybe it in the globalization front, be it the precedent that you have in the US, or be it the pandemic, I think a lot of that is being put into question, that, do you really want the US Ivy League education? And that business is coming into scandal. Do you think you would also cater to some of those areas, and perhaps that could be also new models for edtech companies out here? What do you think?
It's interesting. You know, I think the elite and selective universities globally, especially the ones in the US, they're going to do just fine. I'm sure, travel restrictions and COVID and all that's going to definitely make some challenges, but there's such high demand for that. And when some of these experiences, you're not obviously you could learn biology or chemistry or becoming a computer scientist in a lot of places. You don't have to go to a name brand university. A lot of the appeal of that is that students will be exposed to other students who are also ambitious and looking to do interesting things. Maybe those relationships build over time. I met my wife in college, so that's pretty priceless. I don't think that could have happened over distance learning. So there's always going to be a demand for that. With that said, I have no doubt that there's going to be more of a push towards either hybrid models where you can move around the globe and travel while you stay engaged in your classes, or even full virtual models. Because I think once you get into that young adult age, the autonomy and the ability to have that flexibility starts to be pretty powerful, and usually those students have a lot more motivation. So we'll see what happens. I don't think it'll happen from the for-profit sector, because once again, in the United States, we've had places, I don't know if you know, like University of Phoenix, these online universities, and they very quickly get into, they become very good at marketing and getting tuition. And I'm not telling you anything that people don't know. There was a whole scandal in the US around this. But then a lot of students, especially very vulnerable students, low-income students, they would essentially fall for the marketing, take on debt, and then they wouldn't graduate, or they would graduate and they wouldn't get the jobs that they were promised. And so I think the for-profit incentives in sector can be dangerous when it comes to degree granting. And so, but I think in the not-for-profit sector, there could be some interesting, I can imagine a lot of existing physical schools create a virtual arm to either blend or be able to serve a lot more students. And I think that could be interesting for a lot of people.
So tell me one thing, if you were to tell me like 3 key opportunities and 3 key challenges as to where you're building out your business in India, what would those really be?
Well, the opportunities are, you have a large population of folks who are hungry for education. The culture of India, I mean, we know, I grew up in an Indian family. The culture at all levels is that everyone recognizes the importance of education. And at the same time, it's a country where a lot of kids aren't getting access to a world-class education. There's kids in villages who, there might not be anyone in the village. There might not be anyone within 20 miles who could teach you, calculus or physics. So they want access. You have this whole, tutoring industry in India, tuition industry, where families are spending huge chunks of their income to essentially spend many more hours. And not only does that cost money, not only does that take up a lot of students' time, it's actually causing anxiety and stress for students. That's frankly unhealthy. So those are the opportunity type thing to fix that type of thing. And then the complexities of it are, it's India it's as diverse as Europe. The number of languages, the number of regions, the number of standards. India has a very vibrant democracy that is for the most part very good, but it can also lead to complexities and things. So it's a very complex system. But I think the opportunity there couldn't be higher when you look at the hunger from families and from students for something. And I hope that we, and I hope others can play a role in getting the students so they can reach their potential, but doing it in a way that's far healthier for them, far more fun for them, and a lot less costly for their families, essentially free.
US, you have this system where I think Obama started this, where you have this grading system, right? I mean, first you have to assess that how effective an Edtech system is, and then you can sort of apply it to a school to college. I think in India, I think it's more kind of evidence-based. You don't really have a past performance system. Do you think, given the Edtech usage and Edtech platforms in India, we sooner or later have to get to something like this, whether it's a standard or measurement to say that, this is acceptable as a method or mode of teaching in a particular school?
Yeah, you can't really improve something unless you're measuring it. Now, standardized testing in the United States has very mixed reactions. Some people say you have to measure it. So, the US does a good bit of testing, especially compared to other countries. But then there's the other kind of testing fatigue. It takes time away from class. People are afraid of teaching to the test, and you lose some of the powerful intangibles that aren't measured on the test. In a lot of cases, you take the test, you get the scores, but then what do you do with the scores? How is it going to be actionable? If you're not using the data, why go through the whole exercise? So I think in a place like India, there's an opportunity to instrument in this way, but do it right. Do it so that, you can imagine in the old world when you had to take a standardized test, everyone would, take a paper test or even a digital test, but it was a one-time snapshot of what you know and don't know. But now using online tools, you could get a continuous read. Every time a student practices an item, gets an explanation, the system can infer where the student is in their learning path, what their gaps are. And you can actually get a much better and more continuous and real-time read than just taking a standardized test once or twice a year. And then you automatically make it actionable. Hey, this is where your gaps are. Why don't you work on this? Why don't you work on that? And then you can measure that growth by every now and then polling the student over and over again. So I think there's an opportunity there because you're absolutely right. In India, we work very closely in Brazil and other parts of Latin America. And it's the same notion. People, they don't know, there's not a clear measuring stick yet, except at the kind of the terminal, high school graduation level.
Tell me one thing in terms of competition, how are you coping with the likes of very heavily funded Byjus or the Academy of the world? How are you coping with that? Or do you sort of really consider them as a competition, so to say?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't view it that way. In a lot of ways, the more people investing, the more people innovating in the space, the better. And, it's not, we aren't out there and, it's not that if Byjus gets a customer, that's one less customer for Khan Academy. If students are getting value and things like that, that's great. What is unfortunate is if students who didn't even try Khan Academy say, wait, this thing is free and this is just as good or better than anything else out there. That I think is unfortunate because once again, we're not, if it's a billionaire's child that decides to pay for, $300 for a course that they could get for free, I won't lose sleep over that. But if it's a family whose annual income is $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a year, and they're taking 10% of their income just so their child can learn calculus, when, Bill Gates can afford anything and his children are using Khan Academy, that feels like a lost opportunity. So, I think it's healthy. The more people out there, the more people innovating. But our lane is we want everyone to find value in Khan Academy, but we especially want those who otherwise would not have opportunities to use it. And so, yeah, I don't really view it as competition. And I also view this as, it's interesting. Over this last 10, 12 years of Khan Academy, there's always kind of trends. There's, I would say the for-profit cycle burns up and down much faster than it's for us, we're kind of like, this is a marathon. Our goal is not, we're no one you own as much of Khan Academy as I do. We're not trying to IPO. We're not trying to get to a liquidity event for investors. We can, at least if we have access to a low-cost device, we can learn at their own time and pace. We can master concepts, and eventually, I hope that we can find ways to give people credentials, so we can give them proof of their learning so that they can get jobs, they can get into higher education. We're already starting to experiment with some of that right now. So it's just a very different goal. It's a very different vision, and frankly, it's just even a different source of where we're getting our resources from.
And what experimentation, you said you're talking about some of the 2 or 3 things that you're doing. Can you talk us a little about that experimentation bit that you spoke about?
Oh, well, there's a lot of, one of the things that we're doing right now is that we're realizing there's going to be a huge gap for students as they go back to school. And a lot of people, most people associate Khan Academy with the video aspect of Khan Academy, which is very popular. But most of our resources are actually on the exercise piece, where students can get as much practice and feedback as they need, and the software makes recommendations. And that, I know I've been saying this a lot in this call, but there's really no other platform with that level of efficacy and sophistication as that. I mean, we have spent several hundreds of millions of dollars on that platform. Now, it's been mainly philanthropically funded. And, what we are trying to modify that platform so that when back to school, we'll have courses that get students to their grade level and then beyond as quickly as possible. They can start a student at 1 + 1 = 2, but then very quickly, once they master concepts, they can get to their 6th grade level or 8th grade level, or get to geometry level or algebra level. So that's one area. There's another project that I'm working on. It's actually a bit of a side project where I'm, as you can imagine right now in times of school closures and social distancing, video conferencing has become a major means of education, and it's hit or miss. Some teachers are digital natives. They've been able to figure it out, and not just the technology, but they figured out how to use the technology. So it's actually interactive. So you actually can have a seminar or dialogue. I'm experimenting with a school district in the Los Angeles area where essentially any student in the district can say what they're having difficulty in, and any teacher in the district can say, oh, look, a lot of students are having trouble factoring quadratics. I am going to schedule a Zoom session factoring quadratics. And then the kids attend, and then there's a review. Hey, teacher, you did a great job. And so you can imagine that opens up, and it's no longer 30 students to one teacher. It's now 80,000 students to 2,000 teachers. And teachers can teach together, and it's a much more dynamic model where the teaching can follow where the demand is from students. So that's another area that I'm intrigued by. We have a lab school. It's called Khan Lab School, which was built to figure out what could learning look like in the future. And obviously it was built pre-COVID, but that school has been able to virtualize very quickly. And so there's talk, maybe we open up that virtual version of Khan Lab School to more students. That's another area of experimentation. We're building out into English and language arts. Actually, one of the most exciting things is what we're doing on early learning. We have an app called Khan Academy Kids, and that's for ages 2 to 7. And an efficacy study just came out where we took low-income students, families making below the poverty line, and these students, you could imagine, were well behind the average. And then after just 20 minutes a day for about a month and a half, the gap was completely closed for these students. And so that app I'm really excited about as well.
You mentioned this interesting thing about the future lab school. So what is the future of learning? Can learning really be all virtual? What really is the future of learning?
Well, to answer your question, I don't think it should be all virtual. I think it should be a blend of the, for what do I want for my own children? My own children, which I would frankly should want for every child, which I do, is learning is not bound by time or space. So if you want to learn, it's 3 in the morning. Well, you should be sleeping, but let's say it's 3 in the morning and you want to learn, you should be able to learn. And you could learn asynchronously on Khan Academy. The software works you through, you going at your own time and pace. And even if you need help, you can imagine, say, I need help. And then maybe a teacher from India shows up and says, hey, it's 3 in the afternoon where I am. What can I help you with? And maybe it's a volunteer, maybe it's you can give someone a tip. Who knows? There's different models that could work. So that's where the virtual aspect is. And then, but you also want to be able to go into a room with peers, to have, to kind of have an extended family, and have adult mentors, teachers who are invested in you, who care about your path, who know you well, who you have a long-term relationship with, who can give you a hug when you need it, who can, pat you on the back or be a little strict when you need it. I think that's very, very invaluable. And, and also just the socialization. School isn't just about learning your grammar or learning, how to solve an equation. It's also about how do you learn to work with others? How do you learn to communicate? How do you learn to deal with adversity? Some of that can happen online as well, but a lot of that happens even implicitly happens in the schoolyard and all of that. Some of it's not that good. I remember middle school, some aspects were a little rough, but actually even those things you learn a bit. So the ideal is a blend, but I think the future is it's going to be less rigid. You're going to be able to go back and forth between these two. If I get to go on a vacation, if I have vacation from work or maybe I have a business trip, my kids could come with me and keep learning, but also get the benefit of traveling to China with me. And obviously, what I'm describing is I'm lucky that I get to go business trips on, around the world. Or if I want to go spend time with my mother in New Orleans, my kids could come and keep learning. I think you're going to have personalization is going to be a bigger trend. Once you break the learning bounds of time and space, once you break hey, we're going to give a one-pace lecture to everyone, then you can use technology tools to let everyone learn at their own pace. And if you have everyone learning at their own pace, you can do mastery learning, which means if you got an 80%, it doesn't mean you should just be labeled a C student for the rest of your life. It means, hey, you just haven't learned it yet. Keep working on it until you get to a 90% or 100%. I think a trend we're going to see is more competency-based learning. Most of the system has been focused on how much time have you spent in the chair? And then if you've done what you're told, we'll kind of give you credit. But I think we're getting to the world of, I don't care whether you learned this in the chair, on the beach, in your kitchen, but if you've learned it, show it, and we'll give you the credit, which, competency-based learning. So I think all of these trends are going to happen. And, I would have predicted they would have happened over the next 5-10 years, but it might be.
It's happening sooner than later, you said.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, this crisis we're in has been this is going to be
Zerator.
remembered in education history for a very long time.
Suppose you are stuck in an elevator with the Byjus Ravindran of Byjus, and what would be your advice or message to him?
Yeah, and I know you've asked several questions about Byjus and whether I'm actually a fan of Byjus. I think he creates. We've actually had some team members go back and forth between our organizations. I actually think they're creating a value. They have some good content, and I think talented content creators and Byjus himself. I you know I would love to convince him that there's a model that you could have more impact.